The first warning sign wasn't the calendar invite titled Mandatory Transition Overview. It was the timing, 6:15 in the morning. Not 6:30, not 7, but exactly 6:15. It was the kind of time chosen by someone who considers sleep a weakness and who thinks drinking green smoothies is a substitute for an actual personality. I walked into the main conference room with the quiet calm of a man who has meticulously tested his disaster recovery protocols every single month for the last 14 years. My suit jacket was casually tossed over my arm, a cup of dark roast coffee in my right hand, and absolute silence in my left. On the far side of the massive oak table sat Julian Vance, our chief technology officer and a walking billboard for corporate arrogance. He was flanked by two human resources representatives who looked like they were preparing to deliver devastating medical news rather than a corporate update. Elias, Julian said, smiling with all the artificial warmth of a neon sign flickering in the rain. You have been an incredible part of our journey here at Vanguard Logistics. However, as we modernize our infrastructure, some legacy roles simply evolve, and naturally some legacy personnel must evolve as well. Brenda from Human Resources chimed in immediately, reading straight from a laminated script that had been completely stripped of any human emotion. This is a redundancy-based departure, Elias. It is not a performance matter. We are simply moving in a different direction. Julian chuckled softly, leaning back in his leather chair. Software replaced you. 3 words. That was all it took. Not a single expression of gratitude. Not a moment spent acknowledging that I had personally designed, built, and maintained the entire Aegis framework that currently handled every single parcel, truck routing, and warehouse inventory check for their entire operation. It was just a smug declaration from a man who thought he had automated the universe. I stared at him for a long moment, saying absolutely nothing. I just tightened my grip around my coffee cup until the cardboard sleeve creaked under the pressure. I was 54 years old. I had spent 14 years turning their digital infrastructure from a chaotic mess of taped-together scripts into a robust, enterprise-grade powerhouse. And now, they were discarding me like an outdated manual. Brenda slid an exit packet across the table. It was thick, heavy, and smelled faintly of fresh printer ink and corporate betrayal. I flipped to the first page, then the second. When I reached the 4th page, I saw the timeline. My termination date was set for 3 days before my contract was scheduled to automatically renew. 3 days. They were trying to outplay me by slipping through a technicality. "Do you have any questions?" Brenda asked, scribbling something on her notepad that probably read, "Subject remains uncooperative." I looked up, scanning Julian's face like I was reviewing a faulty piece of code that needed to be isolated and deleted. "I wrote the license for the framework," I said, my voice completely even. Julian smiled wider, clearly not listening, or perhaps listening but entirely underestimating the weight of my words. "Of course, and we appreciate your past contributions. That is why we are flying in the new Nexus Core engineering team next week. You will have a chance to do a comprehensive handoff before your final day. It should not take more than a few hours." I nodded slowly. Every muscle in my neck tensed with the monumental effort it took not to lunge across the table. The meeting concluded like a terrible first date. There were awkward silences, manufactured sympathy, and a forced handshake that left my skin crawling. I left the room with the folder under my arm and a quiet storm brewing in my mind. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten them with legal action right then and there. I just walked back to my desk, logged into my secure terminal one last time, and marked the exact date and time in a private encrypted journal. The countdown had officially begun. By the time the office lights automatically dimmed that evening, I had already secured everything that truly mattered. My commit logs, my architectural blueprints, and my legal contingencies were all safely backed up. Clause 14b had been buried deep within the Aegis Framework source code licensing agreement since version 3.1.5. It was a clause that absolutely no one in the executive suite had ever questioned. In fact, I doubt anyone had ever read it. It looked exactly like standard boilerplate text. Termination of the original creator without cause shall immediately void the deployment license. Automatic renewal is not applicable upon involuntary separation. Activation keys expire immediately upon access revocation. There is no grace period. There is no recovery protocol. Corporate legal had approved it 7 years ago because, as usual, no one listens to the architect who built the foundation they are standing on. But they would listen soon. The exit interview was a masterpiece of passive aggression. The Human Resources Office was freezing, likely to keep the process moving quickly. I sat across from a junior compliance officer who looked like she had practiced empathy by watching corporate training videos on double speed. "Let us review the separation checklist," she said, treating the dismantling of my 14-year career like a grocery list. Laptop turned in, access card surrendered, company phone secured. I signed exactly where I was instructed, my pen slicing across the paper with cold precision. Every box checked felt like a nail in the coffin of Vanguard Logistics, though they had no idea they were the ones being buried. "Just a quick reminder," the compliance officer noted, tapping the glossy page. "Your non-disclosure agreement remains in effect for 5 years following your termination. This includes proprietary architecture details, client schemas, and any administrative credentials." I blinked once. It was not a warning. It was a bedtime story they told themselves so they could sleep at night. None of them realized that I was the architecture. I was the schema. The very system they were trying to protect themselves from was my creation. We are all very excited about the upcoming transition. The Human Resources Director chimed in from the corner. "The Nexus Core team will assume maintenance of the Aegis framework next week. They will bring a fresh perspective." I offered a slight, knowing smile. They are going to need a lot more than a fresh perspective, I thought to myself. The compliance officer completely missed the implication. They are incredibly talented. They have already proposed containerizing the deployment layers to simplify the rollout across our new server clusters. I tilted my head slightly. "Interesting strategy," I replied quietly. "I hope they are prepared to handle catastrophic failure cascades." Nobody laughed. I watched the clock on the wall tick precisely to 5 minutes past 3 in the afternoon. That was the exact moment my employment status flipped from active to separated in their internal system. That timestamp would be permanently recorded on 45 production servers, multiple HR databases, and my own private repository stored safely off-site. I reached into my bag and pulled out the severance agreement. I turned to the amended clauses hidden deep in the document, specifically the section demanding that I forfeit all rights to derivative works and assign all post-employment architecture royalties to Vanguard Logistics. "Nice try," I said calmly, pushing the document back across the table. "I am officially declining the severance package." The compliance officer looked genuinely shocked. "I am sorry," she asked. "Unacceptable clause amendments," I explained. "I will not be signing this document." "But you will lose the payout," Brenda said, her voice laced with confusion. "It is quite generous. I will manage," I replied. The indifference I received from the legal representative was palpable. "That is your prerogative," he said without looking up from his phone. I stood up, gathered my things, and walked out. There was no dramatic exit, no shouting. Just the quiet sound of the door clicking shut behind me as I walked out into the afternoon sun, ready to let the countdown finish its work. It was the very nervous system of the company. My code contained comments that read like desperate pleas, begging future developers not to break the critical routing tables during deployment. And then came the minor layoff 2 years ago. They eliminated 15% of the staff. Human Resources called it a strategic structural realignment. I recognized it immediately for what it truly was. It was a warning. They fired the original developer who built the core scheduling engine without any prior notice. 2 weeks later, the entire deployment pipeline completely collapsed because absolutely nobody else knew where the staging certificates were securely stored. That night, after temporarily fixing the massive system failure with a complex workaround script and a pot of terrible coffee, I quietly added Clause 14b. It sat silently inside the license metadata like a sleeping giant. It was not maliciously hidden. It was simply completely ignored by people who thought they were too important to read the fine print. Just a single sentence buried within a dense forest of legal terminology. If the original software architect is involuntarily terminated without explicit cause, the license automatic renewal shall immediately become void. All active instances will systematically expire upon the very next heartbeat verification check following the separation. Corporate legal rubber stamped the update. Engineering leadership never bothered to read past the executive summary. Marketing certainly would not have known the difference between a license key and a lunch menu. And so, the clause lived there in the dark, quietly waiting for its moment. Now, sitting on my comfortable couch, with a heavy blanket over my knees and the television muted in the background, I lazily scrolled through my professional network feed. Julian Vance's ridiculously polished profile picture stared back at me from the top of a sponsored post titled, "The Future is Now. Vanguard Logistics Launches Intelligent Automation." I clicked on the article. The corporate blog was practically glowing with meaningless buzzwords. They talked about disruptive innovation, streamlining efficiency, and bidding a fond farewell to outdated legacy systems. It was a highly produced, heavily edited digital funeral for my life's work. They even posted a generic stock photograph of a diverse engineering team smiling brightly in front of a whiteboard that was covered in absolute technical nonsense. Random hex codes, meaningless diagrams, and what actually appeared to be a drawing of a bicycle. My throat tightened slightly. They did not just erase my legacy. They threw a massive public parade directly over its grave. I carefully clicked the bookmark button. I did not do it because I cared about their meaningless words, but because I knew that very soon, every single one of those arrogant claims was going to age like milk left out in the midday sun. I slowly opened my laptop and logged securely into the registry dashboard. One more time. I methodically verified the scheduled rollback protocol. The heartbeat verification check was fully enabled. The ping interval was set for exactly 8 hours. There it was, ticking down steadily toward absolute oblivion. It was a countdown to total silence. I exhaled slowly. I was not bitter, and I was certainly not broken. I was just significantly sharper now. I had been soft, moldable clay once, shaped by misplaced loyalty, exhaustion, and foolish dreams of corporate recognition. But now I was forged steel. Vanguard Logistics was about to learn exactly what happens when you attempt to carelessly automate the man who personally wrote the manual on absolute system control. The very first morning of my new life did not begin with frantic notifications or motivational corporate hashtags. I woke up at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, entirely out of deeply ingrained muscle memory. The apartment was completely still. There were no emergency messaging alerts, no pager vibrations, and absolutely no early morning server meltdowns. There was only the gentle, rhythmic humming of my custom-built desktop machine purring softly in the corner of the room. I slowly poured myself a large mug of expensive herbal tea, the specific kind I used to completely ignore during chaotic release weeks, and settled comfortably into the deep quiet. I was not bored in the slightest. I was primed. The fundamental difference between blind rage and calculated revenge is impeccable timing. I opened my personal secure dashboard, a specialized interface I had built years ago on a dusty, obscure subdomain securely routed through multiple anonymized proxy servers. The user interface was incredibly minimalist. It featured only one primary panel and a single ticking clock. The next scheduled license verification check was slated for exactly 1 minute past midnight. A complex, highly customized background script currently sat tightly coiled inside Vanguard Logistics' entirely forgotten corner of their enterprise code repository. Carefully wrapped in a massive dependency chain they had never bothered to fully untangle. I had originally committed that specific script under a generic system maintenance label alongside a batch of 20 unrelated software patches over 3 years ago. The script was designed to silently ping the Aegis Framework license verification endpoint exactly every 8 hours. If the check failed, it would not throw a visible error, and it would definitely not log a system warning. It would simply expire. The verification routine would instantly return a negative response and aggressively cascade through the entire operational stack like a silent, invisible embolism. By the exact moment anyone in the technology department actually noticed, it would be solely because absolutely nothing was working, and they would have absolutely no idea why. I leaned back into my chair, propped my feet comfortably on the heavy wooden coffee table, and deliberately pulled up the corporate blog. Julian Vance's face, polished, tanned, and digitally filtered to corporate perfection, beamed proudly at the very top of their latest public relations fluff piece. He wrote extensively about their deep gratitude for the past, their immense excitement for the automated future, and exactly how they were aggressively evolving the core logistics systems. I read the article slowly and deliberately, studying it like a military general analyzing an opponent's desperate propaganda. As we fully embrace the incredible power of automation, we are deeply grateful for Elias Thorne's many years of foundational work, the article read. His professionalism during this necessary transition has been truly inspiring. We wish him only the very best in his next exciting chapter. Professionalism, I chuckled softly into my warm tea. They honestly believed I had simply walked out of their building with a generic thank you card and zero consequences. Absolutely no one had noticed that my professional social accounts had gone completely silent. My messaging profiles were locked down, my networking pages were totally dark, and my repository activity was frozen solid, as if I had suddenly gone entirely off the grid. The truth was, I was not currently unemployed. I was heavily armed and carefully watching. I watched every single comment on that blog post. I observed every junior engineer arrogantly bragging about their new cloud rollouts. I noticed every corporate recruiter who foolishly assumed I was desperately searching for a new position. My personal inbox was already filling up with lucrative offers. A major startup in the city desperately wanted a seasoned architect to completely rebuild their aging infrastructure. Another logistics firm across the country offered a massive sign-on bonus that legitimately looked like a telephone number. I ignored every single one of them. There was precisely one more critical task I needed to accomplish. I navigated carefully to the final executable function in my hidden script. The termination switch required one last manual fail-safe, my encrypted confirmation token. I carefully entered my private key, which was securely encrypted via my personal hardware device, and calmly clicked the Authorize button. It was officially set. At exactly 1 minute past midnight, the core system would automatically request its standard license verification, exactly as it always had. However, this time it would instantly receive a polite but devastatingly final response. Unauthorized. License void upon creator termination per Clause 14b, and nothing would visibly blink in the data center. There would be no flashing red alarms, no dramatic system fireworks, just a silent, unstoppable unraveling of total operational control across all 45 production servers. Julian Vance would undoubtedly sleep soundly that night, entirely convinced that he had won the corporate game. He was probably already dreaming about his next major conference presentation, eager to brag about successfully replacing the expensive legacy engineering staff. I set my empty teacup down on the table, smiled broadly, and then opened a new browser window to start researching expensive beachfront rental properties in Europe. I finally had plenty of time, exactly the kind of free time that only arrives when you have carefully planted the explosive, walked calmly away, and left your worst enemies alone with the ticking timer. At exactly 1 minute past midnight, the very first heartbeat ping executed perfectly. It was entirely routine, completely invisible, and embedded so incredibly deep within the Aegis framework that it functioned exactly like a vital blood vessel. The automated ping reached out to the license verification endpoint exactly as it had every 8 hours for the last 7 years. But this time, it absolutely did not receive the expected digital handshake. It received the ultimate kiss of death. Clause 14b triggered successfully. License officially expired. The massive enterprise system did not immediately crash. Instead, it began to slowly bleed out. One by one, the critical microservices began to rapidly fail their internal license checks. The massive scheduling node clusters abruptly stopped communicating with the central database. The automated scaling modules stalled completely. The primary cache backend, which had previously been humming flawlessly like a perfectly tuned engine, froze mid-transaction and permanently corrupted 6 different logistics queues before finally timing out. By 14 minutes past midnight, the main dashboard displayed its very first visible symptom. The metrics tiles did not show error messages. They showed absolutely nothing. The screens went completely blank, resembling the flatlining brainwaves of a deceased patient. The overnight operations technician flagged it as a minor visual glitch and quickly rebooted his monitoring terminal. Absolutely nothing changed. He frantically messaged the emergency support channel, but no one answered. At 42 minutes past midnight, the primary warehouse systems aggressively began dropping thousands of active shipping orders directly from the central queue. A critical checksum failure completely halted the nationwide inventory synchronization exactly 16 minutes later. By 2 in the morning, the primary load balancer routing traffic to their massive logistics partners hit an absolute dead end, aggressively retried the connection for 30 minutes, and then forcefully shut itself down completely to avoid catastrophic protocol exhaustion. Absolutely no warning alerts were triggered because I had specifically designed the framework to be quietly competent, and now it was quietly dead. I did not bother to dress up for the upcoming video call. There was no expensive suit, no neatly pressed corporate shirt, just a highly comfortable, slightly faded dark gray sweater and a heavy ceramic coffee mug resting casually on my kitchen island. I eventually accepted the urgent digital meeting invitation from my completely quiet kitchen. The bright morning sunlight was aggressively slicing across the pristine granite counter like a massive blinding spotlight carefully cast by karma itself. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, keeping my tone exactly as casual as if I were simply answering a relaxed weekend brunch invitation instead of aggressively sitting across from a dozen panicked corporate officials, currently in various advanced stages of professional breakdown. Julian Vance's video camera was predictably turned completely off once again. The man was an absolute coward. The lead corporate attorney was already mid-sentence, desperately trying to sound incredibly calm, highly confident, and absolutely not cornered. "We just need a little bit of quick clarification on the current license structure," she stated smoothly. "If there has been a minor misinterpretation of the terms, we can easily—" "There has absolutely not been any misinterpretation," I cut in, my voice remaining as even and sharp as shattered glass. "You completely terminated me without any documented cause whatsoever. That aggressive action instantly activated the automatic cancellation clause, deeply embedded in my original contract. The massive enterprise system did exactly what it was meticulously designed to do. The clause is entirely enforceable in any court. I have the exact timestamps, the complete repository history, and the highly encrypted email logs to prove it." The attorney desperately tried to force a reassuring smile. "Sure, Elias. We completely understand your position, but Vanguard Logistics invested a substantially massive amount of capital in that entire infrastructure. We can easily argue implied ownership in federal court. I officially filed the federal copyright on the Aegis framework exactly 5 months ago," I stated calmly, slowly lifting a single, crisp sheet of paper directly into the camera frame, like a highly professional poker player revealing a completely unbeatable hand. "This is the official United States copyright registration. The full, unredacted codebase is extensively annotated, completely timestamped, and digitally notarized by a federal authority. Would you like me to read the exact official record number for your notes?" The digital meeting room fell completely, utterly dead silent. Even the most aggressive board members entirely stopped blinking at their screens. I could actually hear someone on the call exhale heavily, sounding exactly like they had just been violently punched in the stomach. Julian finally unmuted his microphone, his voice shaking terribly. "Elias, please, let us just be reasonable about this." I slowly turned my gaze directly toward the glowing camera lens, locking in like a highly trained sniper acquiring a highly valuable target. "You specifically told me that automated software had completely replaced me, Julian. Now, that exact same software has gone completely quiet, and here you are, desperately asking the digital ghost for immediate technical assistance." The incredibly nervous chief financial officer aggressively cleared his throat. "What exactly do you want from us, Elias?" I absolutely did not smile. I did not even blink. I calmly named my exact, non-negotiable price. "You can legally license the Aegis framework back from my company at exactly 4 times the original operating rate. It will be a prepaid, highly restricted annual contract, absolutely not a perpetual agreement. Furthermore, the new service level agreement completely mandates that I am officially retained as the exclusive consulting architect for the next 24 months. I retain absolute, unquestionable creative control over any and all future architectural changes. Oh, and you will immediately issue a highly public, completely unedited retraction of your incredibly arrogant automation rollout statement. I want every single corporate blog post completely rewritten today to accurately reflect that the Aegis framework was entirely built, heavily maintained, and is completely owned by Ironclad Systems. My name stays permanently attached to it. One senior board member chuckled bitterly into his microphone, producing a terrible sound exactly like heavy gravel being violently crushed under a massive tire. "Heaven help us all," he muttered miserably. He was patiently playing three-dimensional chess while we were all blindly eating paste in the corner. Another highly stressed executive aggressively rubbed his exhausted face. "You are literally extorting this entire company right now," he accused me angrily. "Absolutely not," I replied, my tone completely dry and emotionless. "I am generously offering you an incredibly clean, highly legal way out of your massive disaster. The only other alternative is continuing to blindly let your highly profitable national supply chain completely drown, while I sit here peacefully drinking warm tea on a beautiful balcony." The attorney opened her mouth to argue, quickly closed it in defeat, and simply looked down at her desk. The chief executive officer, whose video camera was finally turned on, but whose soul appeared to be fully detached from his physical body, finally spoke. "Send over the final legal agreement right now. We will have our desperate lawyers review it immediately." "You can certainly read it," I said, slowly standing up from my kitchen stool. "But I highly recommend that you absolutely do not attempt to edit a single word of it. The terms I just provided are not polite suggestions. They are the exact, non-negotiable cost of arrogantly underestimating the specific person who meticulously built the very ground you are currently rapidly sinking through." I firmly clicked the button to leave the digital meeting before any of them could even attempt to reply. I did not do it in aggressive triumph. I did not even do it in gleeful celebration. I did it purely with the profound, quiet peace of someone who had finally stopped desperately waiting for corporate recognition and instead simply wrote his own massive value directly into a highly binding legal contract. At exactly 59 minutes past 11 o'clock that evening, I slowly opened my personal laptop while sitting comfortably on the quiet terrace of a beautiful beachfront cafe. The gentle ocean waves absolutely did not care about corporate server uptime, and the cool night air smelled wonderfully like salt, sweet citrus, and profound closure. I calmly clicked open the final contract document that the corporate legal team had desperately rushed back to me. It was the absolute final binding version. There were absolutely no aggressive red lines, no confusing corporate modifications, and absolutely no hidden clauses. It contained just my strict, non-negotiable terms, exactly word for word, perfectly maintained clause by clause, reading beautifully like tiny, highly satisfying revenge poems written entirely in standard formatting. I slowly scrolled down to the very end of the extensive document, paused for a brief, highly satisfying moment, and then securely applied my official digital signature. Elias Thorne, Principal Architect, Ironclad Systems. The exact moment I firmly hit the send button, the entire enterprise license instantly reactivated. Somewhere over 1,000 miles away, 45 critical Vanguard logistics servers immediately blinked back to glorious digital life like a massive technological beast rising on a perfectly hardwired gospel. The highly complex logging systems flawlessly reinitialized. The massive shipping queues completely unfroze. The critical monitoring dashboards began aggressively spitting out accurate logistics data like violently shaken soda cans finally bursting open. Millions of delayed orders instantly resumed their highly complex routing protocols. Thousands of critical application programming interface calls entirely stopped timing out. The massive distribution centers aggressively flickered awake with the incredibly dumb, blind joy of automated systems that absolutely do not know exactly who just saved them from total digital destruction. In the primary corporate communication channel, the exhausted night shift technicians posted a single, desperate line. "We are finally completely green across the entire board. Julian Vance was absolutely not there in the office to witness the glorious recovery. He had officially submitted his formal resignation that exact same afternoon, leaving completely quietly and absolutely without any corporate ceremony. There was no farewell party for him, no public expression of gratitude, just a hastily forwarded email thread and an incredibly cowardly disappearing act. The Human Resources Department was probably still politely wishing him the absolute best in his future professional endeavors, exactly like they had arrogantly done to me just one day prior. Meanwhile, the incredibly expensive onboarding packet for the new Nexus Core engineering team sat completely unopened in an abandoned digital inbox, desperately waiting for someone brave enough or incredibly stupid enough to attempt to inherit the massive enterprise system that I now entirely ruled, with absolute authority from the outside. Because securely buried at the absolute bottom of the newly signed contract, just beneath the incredibly massive consulting fees, the aggressive service level agreement, and the strictly non-negotiable annual renewal terms, was one final, highly destructive clause. Consulting architect Ironclad Systems firmly retains absolute design authority and total override access for the Aegis framework systems for the next 24 months. Total compensation is officially set at exactly 4 times the previous full-time executive salary. I absolutely did not just get my old job back. I officially got incredibly promoted with total, unquestionable sovereignty over their entire operation. Now, as the warm sun slowly melted completely into the dark ocean and the small cafe's overhead string lights gently flickered on for the evening, I lazily scrolled through my professional social media feed. Vanguard Logistics had just posted a massive, highly formal public retraction. It was an incredibly long apology that actually credited me specifically by my full name. They publicly claimed the catastrophic outage had simply been a massive misunderstanding of incredibly complex legacy licensing parameters. They even explicitly called me a truly visionary architectural engineer. I loudly snorted straight into my cold drink. So I was considered a visionary now, was I? My personal phone aggressively buzzed on the table. It was a brand new, highly urgent email. The subject line read, "Urgent Infrastructure Consultation Request from Chief Technology Officer at Action 2. The message was incredibly brief, but highly lucrative. "We just saw exactly what you successfully pulled off at Vanguard Logistics today. We really need to talk immediately. We need a complete architectural rebuild of our systems. You can name your exact hourly rate." I slowly leaned back in my comfortable chair, letting the crisp salt air gently curl into my sweater sleeves. I took another slow, satisfying sip of my drink, picked up my phone, and calmly tapped out a single, highly deliberate reply. "It completely depends on exactly who writes the software license." I firmly hit the send button and smiled. Honestly, the most incredibly dangerous employee in any massive corporation is absolutely never the loud, arrogant one who constantly brags in important meetings. It is always the quiet one who carefully listens to everything, meticulously documents absolutely everything, and patiently waits for the perfect moment to strike. This incredible story always hits me extremely hard because it perfectly reminds us that real, unstoppable corporate leverage is absolutely never about making loud noise. It is always about possessing deep, undeniable knowledge. There is something truly beautiful about an intelligent person successfully turning corporate betrayal into absolute, unquestionable power without ever having to aggressively raise their voice. Thank you so much for reading. You tired cubicle warriors. Please remember to protect your own digital work out there. Unless, of course, you happen to be my arrogant former boss, in which case you are completely on your own now. The ultimate career revenge has officially been successfully executed.